The title of my presentation is Promises of a Global Network, the Utopistic Expectations Towards the Internet in the Digital Cultural Periodicals of the 90s in Hungary. Digital culture is often interpreted as a homogeneous cultural experience, universal regardless of the local or regional context. However, its conditions have always been dependent both on the mechanisms of the local social and cultural environment and the economical, political, technological circumstances. The establishment of new liberal democracies in the East Central European societies coincided with the development of the publicly accessible Internet in the 90s. As the post-war period was defined by the limited and controlled accessibility of Western technological products in the Eastern Bloc, therefore, the World Wide Web, as available as a public domain since 1993, within the new political circumstances, reinforced the positive expectations towards becoming part of a new global network, and thus the equalization of center-periphery relations. The adaptation of the structure of neoliberal capitalism and the development of digital technology was expected to result in a societal and cultural transformation. Although the change of the political regimes also implemented the freedom of the press, most parts of the Eastern Bloc continued the tradition of producing alternative media in the cultural field, identified as small media by Andreas Bröckmann and Inke Ernst in 1997. Referring to the post-war period, they declare, of course, on the local level, there was an abundance of small unofficial media, niche media, which was often short-lived and yet could maintain an exchange of information and communication, which, according to the official version, could not exist. Despite the transformation of the conditions of the public sphere following the change of the regimes, alternative publishing and experimental media remained significant channels for communication within the cultural field. This is what Bröckmann and Ernst also call the small media normality in the East. Through the example of 3 experimental digital periodicals created in the early 90s in Hungary, this paper aims to illustrate how the local cultural field tried to adapt to the emergence of new digital technologies in the transitional period, and how these small media initiations reflected the utopian idea of repositioning Hungarian culture and experimental art practices both on the local and the global map. The periodicals mentioned here are among the first reactions to the appearance of digital technologies and the Internet as a global network in the cultural sphere. Therefore, their approaches are significant as the earliest examples of reconsidering the periodical format. In this paper, I aim to argue that these early experiments used digital technologies to establish new centralities within the cultural field, which was followed by the realization of the mechanisms of globalization and market liberalization in the second half of the 90s. The Hungarian cultural field has a long tradition of experimental digital periodicals, tracing back to the 80s. In 1980, video art pioneer Gábor Bódi radically reconsidered the concept of periodicals. The video cassette magazine entitled Infermental, published annually until 1991, featuring international video artworks distributed worldwide, was a groundbreakingly new idea of circulating materials of electronic media technologies and new media art, thereby also subverting the central peripheral positions of video artists and their audience. In 2012, art historian László Beke referred to Bódi's project as the prelude of YouTube, predicting a new era of the unlimited possibilities of sharing audiovisual materials on a global scale. Although this interpretation seems an exaggeration, Infermental's relevance regarding the development of the history of early Hungarian digital culture is undeniable. Periodicals, both digital and print ones, played an outstanding role in the evolvement of early digital culture worldwide. One of the earliest cultural mediums reflecting on the development of the Internet was the magazine called Wired, published in print editions since 1993 and online since 1998. Wired quickly became a leading magazine of digital culture, also representing a revolutionary new approach to avant-garde graphic design. However, despite its hegemonic position, Wired did not attempt to maintain a critical position in the dissemination of information on digital technology. Therefore, it was often criticized already in the early years. One of the earliest experimental digital periodicals in the Hungarian cultural field in the 90s, called Xanner, was inspired by the Californian cybercultural magazine, Mondo 2000, published between 1984 and 1998, which also served as a prototype for Wired. The idea of Xanner was conceived by some university students in Szeged, Hungary, to distribute information on digital and cyberculture in Hungary, following Mondo 2000's anarchic subcultural approach. Xanner was published in early 1994 as a diskmag, a disk magazine on floppy disks, an innovative way of sharing magazines in an electronic format in the 80s and early 90s. By the end of 1994, the content was also published on the web. The founders were primarily interested in the international cyberculture movement and called themselves the East Edge Group, reflecting on the peripherality of the Hungarian cultural field. In their registry document, the group defined their mission as the aim of reconnecting Hungary to the global cultural circuit. The utopian atmosphere of the transitional period not only offered the transgressibility of the geographical borders, but also promised the possibility of balancing centre-periphery relations within the cultural field. The members of the East Edge Group, referring to themselves as cultural information providers, created the first digital medium for cyber philosophy in Hungary, publishing and self-translating texts from Bruce Sterling or Hakim Bey. Although Xanner was only distributed in an underground way among friends, the East Edge Group managed to maintain a significant position in the regional digital cultural scene forming around the mid-90s. The connection to the international field was supported by the Metaforum conference series, organized at the Hungarian Academy of Fine Arts between 1994 and 1996. Besides internationally recognized artists, activists, and theoreticians of digital culture, the founders of Xanner were also among the participants, representing Hungarian digital culture and maintaining a critical attitude towards technology. Unfortunately, both in the case of Xanner and Metaforum, the early enthusiasm towards connecting the Hungarian community to the global cultural discourses soon faded away. However, as an experiment with the format of the cultural diskmag, Xanner can be considered as an instant reaction to the availability of new digital technologies within the cultural field, establishing a community at the threshold of cyberculture and contemporary art. Compared to Xanner's amateur experimentalism, the next periodical examined here was developed within professional circumstances and with a more conscious strategy behind it. The CD-ROM magazine ABCD was initiated by the global company IDG in 1994. As a #1 media company, the Boston-based International Data Group was present in Hungary from the early 90s, financing IT magazines in prints such as Computer World, PC World, or GameStar. For IDG, ABCD has served as an experiment for the popularization of information technology through the medium of CD-ROM, which has been a dynamically developing medium in the first few years of the 90s, replaced by the web around the middle of the decade. As the director of IDG Hungary, István Bíró, later declared, the case of ABCD has been controversial for the company from the very beginning. While ABCD was imagined by its editors as a cultural multimedia magazine, the company has been putting a pressure on the editorial staff to create more IT-related content. The format was not only an experiment for the founders, but for its creators as well. The editorial team of ABCD consisted of young journalists who were interested in the possibilities of using new technologies for distributing information publicly. András Nyírő and István Szakadát, Editors of the first issues have previously worked together on the first Hungarian multimedia CD-ROM, conceived in 1993 under the title Politica for Windows, adapting a book investigating the careers of communist leaders of the socialism to the CD-ROM format. András Nyírő, who used to be known as the director of the internet in the 90s, identified ABCD as a workshop for multimedia journalism, reflecting on the culture of interaction, approaching a wide range of cultural content, including underground music, classical music, literature, film, poetry, classical fine art, contemporary art, critical discourses about cyberfeminism, historical content, and so on. The visual appearance was a prominent characteristic of ABCD, designed by Xanner, a Turkish-Hungarian graphic designer specializing in multimedia interactivity in the 90s. Although the possibility of creating cultural content with the support of a globally recognized media company seemed like a promising opportunity, ABCD only operated for 2 years. Its short-livingness was partly the result of the emergence of the internet. ABCD was reporting on the web from the first issues on, introducing the internet as a democratic technology of future digital culture. Despite the support of an international company, by the mid-90s, the possibilities of the online presence have overgrown ABCD's mission, and the experimentation with the CD-ROM as a medium became unsustainable. The first chief editor, András Nyírő, left the magazine in 1995 to create one of the first Hungarian online news portals, Internetto, and a few years later established the popular news portal index.hu. Although ABCD came through 2 more issues with a stronger focus and reflection on the web, chief edited by István Szakadát, in 1996 the creators had to accept that the internet overtook the hegemonic position of digital content creation. The seizing of ABCD was not only the result of Nyírő's leave or the decay of the medium, but also the discontinuation of the support received from the IDG group. However, ABCD should be remembered as the first attempt of a regularly published cultural periodical experimenting with the multimedia environment, as well as a prototype for channeling cultural content into the media industry. In 1993, the Mosaic web browser was realized as the first browser supporting the distribution of multimedia materials and the display of audiovisual content in the online environment, resulting in a substantially new concept of creating cultural content and sharing knowledge in the digital context. The first Hungarian cultural periodical transferring its activity to the online space and publishing visual artworks online was entitled Gondolatjel, established in 1981 as a print journal with a focus on art and philosophy. The Virtual Gallery, initiated by the editors László Tölgyes and Ágnes Ivacs in 1994, was the first attempt of publishing art practices dealing with the intersection of analog and digital art in the online space. Invited artists and theoreticians to reflect on the possibilities of the virtual environment. The website was supplemented with the theoretical and philosophical content published offline, particularly one of the last print issues in 1995, published under the title Cyberscope, approaching the notion of virtual reality from different perspectives. The issue was supplemented by János Sugars, one of the most important media artists in Hungary, the web project created for Gallery, reflecting on the interrelations between the physical and the virtual exhibition spaces. The first online periodical specializing in the contemporary art field in Hungary was called Nightwatch, developed between 1996 and 1999. The development was supported by STAKI, the Institute for Computer Science and Control in Hungary, which was regularly collaborating on art projects requiring support in programming or computational knowledge. On its homepage, Nightwatch declares itself as an art network periodical, constantly transforming still life, a market of ideas, images, and news, a Nightwatch around the world. The editorial team consisted of 6 members, artists and theoreticians working on the Nightwatch project voluntarily. The title of the periodical was borrowed from Rembrandt's well-known painting from 1642, and at the same time also served as a reference to the nature of the editorial work. Since all the creators were working on the project as a side job, they could only edit the periodical in the late night hours. Parallelly, these hours were also the most preferable for establishing internet connection on the telephone line. The 90s in Hungary were characterized by the transformation of the contemporary art scene, including the operational strategies of art periodicals. The concept of an online art periodical seemed to provide substantially new possibilities for generating communication within the art field and re-establishing visibility for artists whose activity was formerly controlled and constrained. Aiming to create a new public community around contemporary art, Nightwatch introduced interactive calls and projects, for example, an experiment for common poem writing, reconstruction of ephemeral artworks, extendable web pages, or online discussions on art as a social field. In 1998, 8 young artists created online artworks experimenting with the possibilities of transferring the art space into the virtual environment. Looking back on Nightwatch 2 decades later, Agnieszka Perjesi, one of the founders and editors, referred to the periodical as a public art project, regarding the internet as a possibility for democratizing discourses around the art scene, expecting the visitors to actively participate in the virtual content creation. However, this vision and the project itself could only remain on a conceptual level, as both the number and the accessibility of internet users, especially within the art field, were still in a rudimentary state in the 90s. Although Nightwatch also had the intention of publishing exhibition critiques and articles, the team did not have enough capacities and resources to operate as an online magazine. And after 3 years of experimentation with the online presence, the operational model seemed to become unsustainable. The utopistic belief in encouraging collaboration and connectivity through the internet resembled a similar attitude to what was characterizing the expectations towards the changing political and economical environment in the 90s. From the mid-90s on, the internet played a central role in fulfilling the idea of connecting the post-socialist region to Western liberal democracies. One of the main protagonists of this idea was the Open Society Institute, created in 1993 as a grant-making network for supporting the Soros foundations in East Central Europe. For the Institute, the internet not only represented the idea of democratization and market liberalization, but also symbolized the idea of the open society, referring to Karl Popper's book, The Open Society and Its Enemies from 1945. The original ambition was to provide financial support for civil organizations with the aim of strengthening democratic values in post-Soviet societies. As a regional cultural program of the Open Society Institute, the Soros Center for Contemporary Art, the SCCA network, was established in 1992, disposing of local centers all over the East Central European region, aiming to support the development and visibility of contemporary art of the region and the integration of regional artists into the global art world in the transitional period. With a focus on establishing the global visibility of local artists, the Budapest-based center of SCCA, called C3, organized exhibitions, introduced grants, international residencies, and exchange programs, and provided public domain access for artists and NGOs of the cultural field. The SCCA network operated with a strong focus on the documentation of art practices, among others by supporting the digitization of print periodicals in the second half of the 90s. By the year 2000, The reintegration of East Central European artists into the global scene was considered more or less accomplished by the leaders of SCCA. The activity of SCCA was supporting internet-based projects in the second half of the decade. The activity of SCCA network supporting internet-based projects in the second half of the decade illustrates a substantially new strategy resembling the centralization of cultural content in the online space, and thus the disappearance of alternative digital media as a result of the globalization of the cultural field. As illustrated above, the positive expectations towards the transforming cultural field and its communities in the early digital periodicals in Hungary were resonating with the positive atmosphere characterizing the transitional period in the 90s. Although the examples represent different operational structures, they all had the intention of using the format of digital periodical for re-establishing centre-periphery relations regarding the Hungarian cultural scene. Xanner by establishing new connections between the international and Hungarian cybercultural and contemporary art field, ABCD by using the support of a global company to fill the gaps between the different local cultural fields and channeling them into the media industry, and Nightwatch by experimenting with the democratization of the Hungarian art scene through virtual projects. Some of these endeavors were supported by local or regional organizations, but were mostly driven by the enthusiasm for experimentation with the new digital medium. The presented periodicals have only operated for a few years around the mid-90s as a result of the changing technological conditions and the unsustainability of the financial models. Still, these small media examples perfectly illustrate the attempts of relocalizing centre-periphery relations within the Hungarian cultural dynamics, both in a local and a global context. So, thank you for your attention.